If you enjoy my videos, don't forget to like them, share them, and subscribe to my channel. And remember, small YouTube channels like this can't be monetized, so if you're able to support me by becoming a patron, it really helps. My Patreon link is in the description. I'm not quite sure I communicated what I wanted to communicate when I wrote Lugh Lleu. Maybe I won't manage it today either, but I'll have a go. So Lugh and Lleu's stories have a lot of parallels, as you'll see. And yes, hard polytheists see them as two separate entities where, although I think I'm a hard polytheist, where maybe I see them as something like overlapping a bit. I honestly don't have a word for this. For me, there's a feel to them in both the Welsh texts and the Irish texts, a feel that something is going on just below the surface of both stories. It's very similar. They're both on a trajectory, which is beyond their control to some extent. They're set on a path by other forces. And once they go a certain distance, their more human selves seem to falter a little bit. Now, don't mistake what I'm saying. I love and revere both Lugh and Lleu. It's a big aspect of my devotional work, though, like digging deep into myths for meaning. And I don't believe that doing so ever diminishes the greatness of deities. So I think I've introduced this enough, and this is quite a long piece of full-on storytelling, so be ready for that. Look, they are walking into a lake of fire, water reflecting a great blaze. They enter the cool, clear, perfect water, cleanse away the mud, the mundane dust of their everyday tiredness. The flames burn high on the altar in the temple of golden domes. The fire burns, Bridget and Lugh are lifted high. Those who are called dance through the flames upon the altar of the golden domes. The mountain breathes fire, the earth births fire, dancing through the flames. Bridget on high, Lugh on high, before the time that was, before the myths, there was only this. So that's a strange one. But there was a time in the 1930s when some of the people who lived in the area around Carlingford Lough in Ireland had some rare old beliefs about their area. You see, there's an extinct volcano there. There really is. And the story went that once there was a great fire temple at Carlingford with a pool beside it. And inside, on a high fiery altar, Lugh and Bridget were worshipped until the whole thing was destroyed by the volcano. Now, the reason I know that people believed this in the 1930s is because that's when Ireland had its big project of collecting local folklore with the school children. And there are several versions of this story collected from around Carlingford and Dundalk. So there's a big, hairy, romantic tale connected to this, which sounds suspiciously modern to me. And I tried to do a bit of research, and I haven't gotten very far with that, as to where this belief originates or how old it is. So it's possible that the whole idea found its way into local folklore not long before it was collected in the 1930s. Maybe there was like a talented local storyteller who was a bit fanciful or something like that. I haven't been able to find out. And maybe it really is old folklore. I don't know. But there you have it. The picture they painted just felt like it needed a poem for Lugh. So you probably know something about Lugh. I suppose, like his many skills, that he killed the Fomorian giant Balor. But do you have any idea how he was conceived? Oh, there's some folklore. So there are all these countless versions of the story of Lugh's conception. The best ones, to my way of thinking, start with the smith god Goibhniu and his cow, the Glass Gowan. Now the Glass Gowan, the grey cow of the smith, gave copious amounts of milk, she never ran dry. She used to travel all around Ireland every day, eating the choicest bits of grass. And if anyone was in need, they would bring pails and pitchers and milk her until they had enough. And because of that, there was no hunger in Ireland in those days. Goibhniu needed to work at his forge, and he was able to just let the cow wander because he had a magical halter. And all he had to do was shake that halter in the evening, and the cow would just come running to him, and he would shut her up at the back of his forge, safe and sound for the night. Well, the story's long and complicated. The smithy wasn't too far from the coast of Donegal and within sight of Tory Island, with its grim, rocky spires, the home of Balor. Balor coveted that cow, and he couldn't manage to get her, but finally he managed to steal the halter. Now, Goibhniu didn't dare let the cow out of his sight for fear Balor would shake the halter and she would go running to it. So he was obliged to follow the glass on her daily trip around Ireland, hanging onto her tail. One day, 3 brothers approached the smith and asked him, would he make swords for them? Well, smithing was what he loved to do, but he had no free time anymore because of the cow. But the brothers said that they would take turns minding the cow so that Goibhniu could do the work. Well, it wasn't too long until they left that job to the youngest brother, a lad called Cian. And it wasn't too long before Cian took his eye off the glass gowan, and in an instant she was gone. She ran to her halter, and Balor had her. Goibhniu wasn't too happy, and he threatened to kill Cian, but Cian convinced him that he'd get the cow back, and Goibhniu agreed to let him try. So Cian ran down to the shore, and he was searching the beaches when he saw a warrior in a small, beautiful boat. Well, it was Manannán mac Lir himself. Manannán rowed him over to Tory Island, where the cow was sure to be, and Cian kind of found himself being overtaken by events, as they say. They arrived on the island by night, and Manannán gave Cian a cloak of invisibility. He told Cian that before he could hope to recover the cow, he would have to do some other work. Balor had a tower, and in the tower, he kept his daughter Ethne locked up because there was a prophecy that if she bore Balor a grandson, that grandson would kill him. So she was kept behind 7 locked doors with 12 waiting ladies for company. Manannán told Cian to put on the cloak of invisibility, follow Balor through the locked doors, and to only reveal himself once he was alone with the women. Then he must woo Ethne and lie with her and get her with child. And he'd better lie with the other 12 and get them pregnant too, because that way they wouldn't dare tell Balor what had happened. Now, how Cian managed this in the space of a night, I don't know, but he managed to do his work and get away again unseen by Balor. When 9 months had passed, Cian and Manannán returned to collect the babies, or Balor got wind of what had happened. So they wrapped Ethne's child in this special silk shawl, and they put him carefully into a basket. But the other 12 babies, they just bundled them into a blanket altogether. Cian slung this bundle over his shoulder and kind of fastened it with a brooch to make it easier to manage. But as he was stepping into Manannán's boat, the waves rocked it. The brooch pin gave way, and the 12 babies fell into the sea. Cian looked in amazement as they swam away like seals. And that is the origin of the Selkies, so they say. There was another woman in another tower in another country. Her name was Arianrhod. And if Arianrhod was shut in a tower, it might have been that she locked herself in. Arianrhod was surrounded by powerful magicians, and she feared that they had plans for her. Plans that were a bit hard to discern. Depends on which version of the story you follow. So let me tell you about Arianrhod's family. First, her uncle Math was king of Gwynedd, and he was a powerful sorcerer. In a way, though, Math was a prisoner too, He was bound to his castle by a wee personal problem. He had to keep his feet in the folds of the lap of a virgin at all times. Oh, unless he was at war, then it was fine. I don't even want to think about the practical implications of that for the virgin. Then, as well as Arianrhod, there were her 4 brothers. There was Amathan, the farmer, Goewin, the smith, Gwydion. Well, Gwydion fancied himself a bit of a poet, but his main work was sorcery. And finally, Gylfaethwy, the rapist. So Math's lap maiden was a lass called Goewin. She was noble and beautiful, and although it doesn't sound very pleasant to us, her position in the court commanded great respect. Gylfaethwy fancied her. He went about sighing and moaning, and so Gwydion conjured up a war, got Math involved. He didn't take a lot of persuading. He probably needed to stretch his legs, But although the war was entirely the result of Gwydion's illusions, the carnage was real enough, with terrible losses on both sides. Once the battle was underway, Gwydion and Gylfaethwy nipped back home, and Gylfaethwy raped Goewin in the full knowledge of the whole court, right there in Math's bed. Then they went back to the battle. Gwydion helped Math kill his enemies, the ones who had been Math's friends, until Gwydion stirred things up. Well, when Math got home and found out what had happened to Goewin, he wasn't best pleased. And there were some family interventions on a level that only a really powerful magician can manifest. However, we're trying to make our way toward the conception of Lleu, so you'll need to consult the 4th branch for the juicy bits. The same Math married Goewin and made her queen. We never hear of her again. But by the time it was all done and dusted, Math's need for a new virgin footholder was getting quite urgent. "What about our sister Arianrhod?" said Gwydion, back in Math's good books. "Go and fetch her," said Math, and she was brought before him. "Are you a virgin, girl?" Math came straight to the point. "I don't know that I'm not a virgin," was her inscrutable reply. Now, to me, that seems an odd response to the question, blunt though it is, and there are many theories about why she gave it. My theory, for a long time, was that maybe Arianrhod had a funny dream, probably involving a male family member, or maybe she missed her period, but couldn't remember having sex with anybody, or maybe both. In other words, she'd been the victim of some kind of magical date rape. We'll come to my other theory in a minute, but back to the action. "I don't know that I'm not a virgin," said Arianrhod. So Math threw his magic staff down on the floor. "Step over that, girl," he demanded. And when she did, a golden-haired baby boy just dropped out of her. "Nice baby," said Math supportively, as Arianrhod fled the scene in hysterics. She'd been completely humiliated in front of the whole court. But as she ran from the hall, something else fell from Arianrhod's skirts. We're all thinking, yeah, that would be the afterbirth. Well, seems likely. Whatever it was, Gwydion took a keen interest in it. He surreptitiously scooped it up in his hanky, popped it in his pocket for later. "Let's call this one Dullin," Math said, still entranced by the little blonde guy. So they had him christened, and as soon as they did, he made a break for it, jumped into the sea, and became the nature of the sea, whatever that means. Then, later, Goewin, the brother who was a smith, killed him. I wonder if that's because he looked like a seal. But what's Gwydion up to, though? He's put his little prize in a chest at the foot of his bed. Before you know it, it's another golden-haired child. And Gwydion loves him like a son, or maybe a cousin, or even a nephew. Some families are complicated. So Gwydion finds a wet nurse for the boy, and wouldn't you know it, he grows really fast. At this point, I'll just pause and complicate your world with a juicy tidbit from an old bardic poem. So that poem suggests it may have been Arianrhod herself who was Math's footholder. The lines from the poem by Lewis Mohn run like this. "My complaint concerning a maiden is greater than that of old Math, son of Mathonwy. Arianrhod like the snow, that man could not live without her. Is it possible that Goewin is a later invention or just a different version of the story? Is it possible that the woman Gylfaethwy raped was not Goewin, but his sister? Obviously, we can never know, but you didn't expect me to keep a piece of gossip like that to myself, did you? But I think we should just check in with our other story and see how everybody's doing. So Manannán and Cian made it back to the mainland with Ethne's child, having dropped the babies in the sea. Apparently, freeing Ethne wasn't even on the agenda, so now there's the issue of what to do with the baby, because remember, Cian is trying to recover the cow from Tory Island, and Manannán is helping him. I mean, that's the story, right? Well, they gave the child to a woman called Tylluan. She was a widowed queen of the Fir Bolg, whom the tSúgáin had subdued. And since the Fir Bolg never went to war with Balor's lot, who were known as the Favora, that seems like a pretty safe place to have put him. But although the child lived on Tylluan's milk, he wasn't exactly bouncing and rosy-cheeked. In fact, he looked a bit peaky, and Cian went to Manannán with his concerns. "The laddie needs a name," said Manannán. "Oh, what should we call him?" asked Cian. "Oh, no, said Manannán. "You'll need to take him back to Tory Island. Get Balor to name him. And another thing, it's high time we were getting that cow and halter back to its rightful owners." So Manannán hatched a plan, or maybe we should say he revealed his plan. I think revealed is a better word. This is what he did. He explained to Cian that Balor hated the bleak windiness of Tory Island, and he especially longed to be able to grow apples, but it was too cold and windy on Tory. So Manannán supplied Cian with magical apple seeds that would grow anywhere and produce fruit within a year. He sent Cian to Tory disguised as a gardener, and the lad went with him, and he gave Cian other advice for getting the cow back, as we shall see. So Cian became Balor's gardener. Soon he had a fine crop of apples for him. One day, Cian was carrying a basket of apples into Balor's hall. He tripped in the doorway and the apples spilled on the floor and they rolled everywhere. People rushed to pick them up. But the little lad, who was always at his father's side, he was quicker and more deft than anyone at gathering the apples. So Balor laughed in spite of being Balor and called him, little long arm. And so Lugh Lleu had his name. Cian lost no time in sending young Lugh to be trained and fostered with Manannán. Then he began to demand his gardener's wages from Balor. Now the wages they had agreed on was the glass gowan and her halter, as Manannán had instructed Cian. But now that the time had come, Balor began to refuse, and he offered Cian gold instead, and he looked a wee bit dangerous. But Manannán had warned Cian that this would happen and what to do next. "Why not have the halter sent up to your daughter in her tower," said Cian. "Let her throw it down, and whoever it lands with gets the cow." While Balor agreed to this, he thought Ethne would throw the halter to him. But of course, she threw it to Cian. Cian shook the halter, the cow came running. Then he hurried back to the mainland and returned her to the overjoyed Goibhniu. Back in Gwynedd, Math and Gwydion's wee protege was of an age when he should have been in fosterage and learning arms as well. But there was a bit of a hitch, because only the lad's mother could give him certain things he needed in life. And Arianrhod had left the building. She was in her tower, Caher Arianrhod, to be precise. One thing the boy needed was a name. Another was some armor and some weapons and such like. And in time, of course, he was going to need a wife. So off Gwydion went to the boy, took him to visit Arianrhod in her tower by the sea. Arianrhod greeted Gwydion and asked him who the boy was. "It's your son," he said. "You brought him here to remind me of my humiliations," said Arianrhod. "Get him out of my sight. Don't come back. I want to forget what happened to me, and here you go dragging it all back up." "The boy has no name," countered Gwydion. "You know, there are certain things that only you can give him. I swear he'll not get a name from anyone then, said Arianrhod angrily. You wretch, cried Gwydion, just because the world knows you for a slut because of him. So Gwydion left in a temper, dragging the bewildered boy behind him. But Gwydion soon hatched a plan, transformed himself and the boy into the likeness of shoemakers. He conjured a small ship from seaweed, filled it with leather and tools, and off they went, back to Caher Linn. That wasn't difficult, to coax Arianrhod aboard to be fitted for some shoes. While she was waiting, a wee wren lighted on the gunwales of the ship. Quick as a flash, the boy threw a stone at it, hitting it precisely between the bone and the sinew of its wee leg. Good God, explained that. The fair one has a skilled hand on him. And with that, she had named him Play of the Skillful Hand, Play Flaugafus. And then the boat faded away to nothing, and Arianrhod saw that it was them, and that she had named her son, and she was furious. You tricked me again, brother, she cried. He shall never have arms, not from me, not from anyone. But she did give him arms, because some years later, Gwydion tricked Arianrhod again. Having disguised himself and Lleu as traveling poets, he made her think that her fortress was under attack. But at that, she swore a curse on Lleu that he would never get a wife from among any race of people. Now, Gwydion was desperate. He went to Math, and Math was pretty desperate too. Arianrhod and Lleu held the key to something they needed, something which, for some reason, they didn't seem to be able to get the way most people do. An heir, a champion perhaps. But the mere laws of nature held little sway over the likes of Math and Gwydion. They hatched a plan, and then they hatched a woman. They used all their power to create a woman without the help of a woman. It was what they'd wanted all along. After all, women were just vessels for gestation, but their personal preferences and feelings kept getting in the way. They could see it now. They had nearly achieved it with the conception of Lleu, but then Arianrhod didn't cooperate. This way was much better. They made a beautiful woman. Out of flowers they made her, thinking that she would be as sweet as the mead, as yielding and compliant as the broom, and as fruitful as the oak. They called her Blodeuedd, after the flowers which they'd made her from. There she was, and they wedded her to Lleu, who was glad enough to have her. Back in Ireland, things had been a bit tense since Cian recovered the cow. For one thing, after Cian left Tory Island, the magical apple trees began to wither and die, so Balor was left with neither milk from the cow nor apples on which to feed himself. The Favora began to harry the Tuatha De Danann and make life difficult for them. Manannán watched all this from his otherworldly islands where Lugh was being trained. And he knew it was only a matter of time before the prophecies began to be fulfilled. Now, there are a few things you should know about Balor, and they chiefly concern his eye. Balor of the Baleful Eye was how he was known, for he had once looked on an evil potion being brewed by some druids, and his eye took on the worst of the properties of that liquid. Since that day, Balor had been forced to wear a bronze shield over the eye, because if he so much as looked on something with his baleful eye, he'd be burnt to a crisp. And with Balor's height, what with being a giant and all, he could look at a lot of things at once. And the prophecies said that soon Balor would go to the mainland, and he would stand on the Black Ridge, and he would raise the great bronze eyelid and burn the whole of Ireland to cinders. Of course, Manannán being Manannán, he knew just the magic to counter the prophecy, and that lay with two men, the smith Goibhniu and young Lugh Lleu. Now, Manannán began to arm Lugh with his own armor. Right it was, with a bejeweled helmet. He gave him his own horse, Envar of the flowing mane, who could run over both land and water. He gave him his sword, Fragarach, even though he knew that it would not be the weapon which Lleu would use to kill Balor. Manannán and Lleu sailed to Ireland. In the distance, they could see the smoke where the Favora were making a start at burning Ireland the old-fashioned way. They went to Goibhniu, and they told him the hour was upon them. He must make a spear. Goibhniu, freed from his responsibilities of tending the cow since the return of the halter, carried his forge to the side of the Black Ridge. He set to work, and Lleu and Manannán watched as Balor lumbered toward the Black Ridge. Goibhniu set a spear point to the handle, hammering away industriously. Suddenly there was a shadow over the sun as Balor ascended the ridge. Lleu ran his thumb over his fingertips in anticipation, mesmerized as Balor reached up to lift the shield from his eye. In one deft movement, Lleu swept the spear from Goibhniu's anvil and hurled it into Balor's eye with surgical precision. The prophecy was fulfilled. Balor was dead, and Lleu was king of the Tuatha De Danann. This poem I'm going to read is inspired by the idea that both Lleu and Lleu were skilled in poetry, among other things, and the bards loved to boast, and they loved to contest with one another, as I imagine Lleu and Lleu doing here. I was carried from Ethne's tower. In the other world, I was 9 times fostered, and I was enchanted before my birth by Math and Gwydion from 9-fold elements. I was a builder, a smith, a champion, a harper of 3 noble strains, a sorcerer to shake mountains. I was a skilled one, a poet, a shoemaker, a string and a harp, a shield in battle. I was a cupbearer, hiding the waters. I caused the raven seas to overwhelm them. And I was a slender sword, singing in the trees' branches. I was a forked spear, striking from heaven. I threw the stone into the wall of Tara. My druid sharp skills won the seat from Nuada. I was in the rampart with Dylan Ailton, cloaked in royalty between Math and Gwydion. Perhaps Lleu too fulfilled some great destiny, but if so, those stories are lost. The place names associated with Lleu and the way great families of ancient Britain named their sons after him would certainly make you think that he was once a heroic figure. But the story we have of Lleu is a rather sad one. Blodeuedd soon fell in love with their neighbor, a man called Gronw. And these days, at least, no one blames her much. After all, that was the first time she managed to choose something, anything, for herself. That didn't help Lleu, though. He seems to be as much a victim as Blodeuedd in this story. Blodeuedd and her lover Gronw hatched a plan to kill Lleu. Wasn't easy, what with a magical protection woven around him by Math and Gwydion. However, Gronw and Blodeued's passion for one another made them desperate enough to try anything to be together. They lured Lleu into the one situation where he was vulnerable, and Gronw hurled a magic spear at him. The wound wasn't fatal, though, as much a wound of spirit as of body. As well as the story we know from the 4th branch about the wounded Lleu turning into an eagle and how Gwydion coaxed him down from the tree, there's another more obscure text called the Deceiving of Huan. Cian, which means the sun, is the name given to the Lleu character in this story, while Blodeuedd in this story is known as Tylluan, which simply means an owl. Gwydion, though, he's still searching, and he finds Lleu not in a tree this time, but in Caher Linn, another name for the Milky Way. This is my poem, which was inspired by that story. Where is fair Lleu, the darling of Gwydion? The lover of Tylluan has pierced him, pierced with a spear the shining one who was set about by protection. Where is fair Lleu, the darling of Gwydion? Gone away sporting, we look for him soon, said Tylluan the fair, with her bluebell eyes, meadow-sweet skin. Did she blush like the rose? Where is fair Lleu, the darling of Gwydion? In the sky he is, in Caher Linn his soul, on the milk-white path of Gwydion he walks, as Tylluan takes wing 'neath the moon. Well, Gwydion and Math healed Lleu, and he came straight after Gronw. He came for him in a way which doesn't seem that odd to modern people like us. We're raised on stories of revenge, and we live in a society which expects punishment rather than demanding payment of an honour price. But that's what the old laws of Ireland and Wales called for, reparation, the payment of an honour price when somebody did something like that. Gronw asked Lleu what honour price he required for his wounding and the stealing of his wife. And he probably didn't expect Math and Lleu to raise an army against him. Instead, Gronw asked to face Lleu then in single combat, saying there was no need for widespread bloodshed over what was a personal quarrel. Since Gronw had cast a spear at Lleu before, Lleu would have the first cast this time. Gronw asked only that he might hold up a slab of stone to protect himself. Lleu agreed. He cast his spear. It went clean through the stone and broke Gronw's back, and he died on the spot. It makes me wonder, does a person, a god, with such a destiny only get one throw in their life? It's almost as if Lugh and Lleu went through their early lives as some sort of human missile launcher, fated to make that one perfect throw. Why do their stories diverge so greatly at this point? Is it because somehow Goibhniu and Cian and Manannan's intentions were purer than those of Math and Gwydion? Or is it just a twist in the myths between time and place? And yet, if we visit Lugh again, we find that he too had a taste for vengeance that seemed a bit unfair at times. So sometime after Lugh's victory over the Favora, 3 brothers, sons of a man called Tylluan, murdered Lugh's father Cian. They tried to hide the deed, but Lugh discovered their guilt. They asked Lugh what honour price they must pay for the killing of his father. Lugh, at least, knew that it was a reparation that the law required, but it was revenge that he wanted. And so he demanded that they bring him a list of magical items from faraway places, items which were surely beyond their power to obtain without losing their lives in the process. The story of the fate of the sons of Tylluan is an exciting adventure, describes how they searched the world for the items Lugh had requested. But it's also a tragedy, for they all died wretchedly, and that broke their aging father's heart. Stories about the Hill of Ishnach tell us another tale of Lugh, how he killed Kermit, the Dagda's son, believing that Kermit had a dalliance with his wife. It wasn't even true. The text of the Nenhenichus reads like something out of the death notices in an old newspaper. It goes like this. Lugh Lleu, whence the name? Not hard to say. A great meeting was held at Ishnach between the 3 sons of Kermit, the Dagda's son, and Lugh, son of Ethne, to make peace with him in regard to their father Kermit, whom he had slain through jealousy about his wife. Now the sons of Kermit, namely Macul, Macecht, and Magrenia, had laid a plot to kill Lugh. Macul thrust a spear into his foot. Then Lugh escaped from them by his prowess to yonder lake. There he was killed and drowned, and they say that the cairn which stands on the shore, called the Shidan, was raised over his body. So that cairn is Lugh's grave, and hence comes the names Lugh Lleu, and Cairn Lugach. Lleu has his own death notices in the stanzas of the graves, the old tract in the Welsh language, which describes the resting place of many great people and warriors. There are 2 stanzas for Lleu, and both suggest a watery end and a figure who was hard to love. Here they are. The grave of Lleu Llaugufus, under the sea's shelter, where his kinsman was. That was a man who yielded right to no one. Perhaps that kinsman is his brother Dylan, I don't know. And then it says, the grave of Lleu Llaugufus, under the shelter of the sea, before his time came. He was a man who invited attack. You were always so good at everything. Your long, deft fingers, your athletic build, the harp, the spear, the word. It was all the same to you. You with your perfect focus, your eagle's eye, cunning of a lynx, heart of a lion, brilliance of lightning. We made our vows to you, swore our oaths on you, our hero, our savior, come to carry our faltering king. You were the clever one, the leader, the warrior. Your path was straight. One plan, one purpose, one perfect aim. I want to return to Lugh one last time. For although the cairn on Ishnach may be the place where he's said to be buried, see, he's not really gone. It's Lugh who elopes with Connor's sister and fathers Caher Linn. And there are a few versions of how that goes, but it's always Lugh. It's always Lugh who is the father by some mysterious and magical means. Then there's the story of Con of the 100 Battles. Lugh appeared out of the mist and cast 3 spears at Con, and he stood on his own battlements. Lugh lured him to an otherworldly hall where his sovereignty and the sovereignty of his offspring was confirmed. In that hall, it was Eru herself who gave Con a cup of red ale as a sign of his rightness to rule. And it was Lugh who entered a poetic trance and recited the kings who would rule after Con in Tara. Begotten with so much intention, destined to live with a laser focus, limited to walking in straight lines, the apex predator of the story. Did the lack of a subtle curve prove limiting? Not built for negotiation with sovereignty or bargaining for kingship. Your build was more for taking what was yours, for helping yourself. Maybe you are us. If a god can die, what lessons does he learn then in the hall of the lady with the cup? The last wisdom unfolds. Sovereignty is not taken, after all, not won, but lent. So thanks. That's what I've got for you.